Hiking is something many people enjoy doing. Going out in nature and enjoying the fresh air is just something so many of us love. But it seems so many of us also encounter very creepy and unexplainable things out in the woods while hiking. These subscribers sent in their allegedly true, creepy experiences while hiking. If you have a story you would like to share on a future video, be sure to send it in at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story on a future episode here for everyone in the swamp to enjoy. Now, without further hesitation, let's get into these allegedly true, creepy hiking stories. So I don't really know how to start this story off, but it just happened like an hour ago and I'm still spooked. So, a bit of preface. Me and my friend are home alone right now and have been for a few hours. Every time he comes over, we go to the woods by my house, and it's normally uneventful, with some throwing of rocks and breaking trees and stuff, just some harmless fun. This time, however, something else happened. As I said, we're home alone and have been for a while, and while this happened, we were obviously home alone. We went outside to go to the woods, and the trip there was uneventful, but once we got there, something just felt very off. Everything was dark. Tons of trees had been knocked down and the entire place was not like I remembered it being. We kept going in, still having our usual harmless fun, and at one point, my friend turned to me and said we should go back. I looked at my phone and decided it had only been 30 minutes, and so we might as well stay longer. 'Cause it'll be a few hours until anyone would be at home anyway, so. We continued on, finding a few strange things, like an old crushed Mountain Dew can, probably 10 or 20 years old, and a toy boat which had been completely destroyed by the wind and water and other things. It was probably even older than I was, maybe even older than the can. Our plan was to go further than I had ever been into the woods before, which isn't very hard for us because I've barely been that deep. After walking for a while, we came to a landmark that I knew of that marked about the deepest I had ever been. A while ago, when I was going in very far, I came upon a bridge built on a log that fell over into the river in the middle of the woods. However, one thing was different. There was something sitting on top of it. Whatever was on it was small and resembled the head of an animal. When we got closer and got a good view of what was sitting on top of it, I noticed it was a deer skull, pearly white and clean, sitting on the bridge with no clue as to who put it there and where the rest of it was. Behind the river, there was a huge hill with some creepy small house on it, and while we were looking around, I heard a creak or some other high-pitched noise from up towards it. Freaked out, we began to run from behind me. I hear my friend scream. I hear him running behind me. We both kept running, and once we reached the edge of the woods, we stepped onto the road. I asked him why he screamed and he said he heard footsteps next to him. We quickly made our way home, but when we got there, the garage door was open. Not knowing if it was left open or not, we ran inside, locking the door, checking the house, and turned the alarm on. Now, we're sitting here by the time I finish this. It's nearly 2 hours since and I still can't shake the fear of that eerie woods from my psyche. I'm a 21-year-old girl from a small town in Sweden. Some years ago, me and two of my guy friends from school decided to go into the forest and camp out for the night. This is not the first time we've done this. We had never been to this spot before. Let's call my friends Phil and Ned. We had chosen to go on a camping trip on a warm and sunny Friday in July. We got our parents to drop us off at the entrance to the forest trail that we were going on. Ned had chosen this spot because he had heard his grandfather speak of it before he died, not too long ago. There was apparently going to be a dark camping chalk with a fireplace, and behind that was a small lake. We walked for about 1 hour on an old gravel road surrounded by thick forest. It took much longer than we thought. Like a typical girl, I had, of course, overpacked. Finally, we got to the chalk, and to my surprise, it was really nicely kept. It was a small chalk with 3 walls, a roof, and a wooden floor. We walked straight down to the small lake and jumped in to cool off after a long and sweaty walk. Phil started a fire, and me and Ned carved sticks to grill some hot dogs on. We stayed by the fire all evening and passed out around a bottle of vodka that Phil had taken from his parents, and we talked about life. The sun started to go down at this time. The talking stopped abruptly by a twig snapping behind me. I froze, not wanting to look behind me. Ned got up and got closer to where the sound had come from. He laughed nervously. "Maybe we got a thirsty rabbit on our hands," he said, as he took a sip from the vodka bottle. He sat back down and we started to relax again, trying to laugh it off. We continued our talking a bit longer until we got too tired. Ned went to go and relieve himself behind some trees by the chalk. As I stood up from my place to go to my sleeping bag, I heard someone sobbing. Petrified, I turned around to look where the sobbing came from, and there was a second sob. I screamed and ran over to Phil. He was shocked by my reaction, because he had apparently not heard the sobbing. Ned came out from the other side of the chalk and asked what was happening. I explained myself to them the best I could, and they got silent to listen to the forest sounds. The sobbing did not come again, but now we realized there were no sounds. The forest was eerily quiet. It was way too silent. I was close to freaking out, but the boys tried to explain it away to my imagination and the vodka. We did not want to stay awake anymore, so we threw the last bit of firewood on the fire and got into our sleeping bags on the cold chalk floor and stayed as close to each other as possible. We all had a hard time falling asleep, but eventually, we did end up drifting off. I woke up to Phil whispering in my ear, "Wake up, there's a girl by the fire." I was too tired to understand what he was saying, but looked over by the fire anyway. It was dark, and the fire had almost burned down to ash and gave the surroundings a faint but reddish glow. There was a little girl's silhouette, illuminated by the glow past the fireplace, just by the spot I had previously sat. I looked at Ned, but he was fast asleep, and then I looked at Phil, but he just stared at the girl. She had her head in her hands and she had brown dirty dress on, long messy blonde hair, and looked to be no more than 3 years old. Ned lay there for what felt like forever before Phil stood up and looked at me. I followed his lead and did as he did. Ned woke up and was just about to say something when Phil signed for him to be silent, and he pointed to where the little girl stood. The silence was again broken by the sobbing coming from the girl, but she had not moved. A cold chill went through me as I realized that it was the same sounds as I had heard before. I wanted to believe that the little girl was only lost, but I just knew in my bones that this was not a normal little girl lost in the woods. Phil looked closer to the girl slowly and tried to talk to her. Hi, my name is Phil. Don't be scared. Are you lost?" The little girl stopped the sobbing, and we waited for her to respond. She lifted her head up slowly. I expected a horrible, deformed-looking face to greet us, but her face was beautiful. That was until she opened her mouth twice the size it should have been and started screaming a horrifying scream. I fell backward onto the chalk and hit my head on the hard, damp floor. I was stunned by the pain and got a splitting headache. When I regained some of my senses, I started to really freak out. The little girl had disappeared. "What the hell was that?" I screamed. The boys did not answer me, but they were already stuffing their things into their backpacks as fast as they could and screaming that we had to get out of here. I tried to do the same, but because of the intense pain in my head, I was not as fast as they, so they had to leave some stuff behind. I did not care as long as we got out of there fast. We started running down the old gravel road that leads out to the parking lot. It was almost pitch dark on the small road, only lightened by the faint light coming from our phones. Ned tripped on something and fell to the ground. We stopped and helped him to his feet again, but he had hurt his foot in the fall, so we had to slow down. We started to calm down, thinking that the little girl had not followed us, but we did not say a word to each other. Phil called his father and begged him to come pick us up as soon as he could. A bit upset and grumpy by being woken up this late, he reluctantly agreed to come. We had maybe 10 minutes left to get to the parking lot when I stupidly looked behind us. There the little girl stood, not even 5 meters behind us, with her head in her hands. I started crying and the boys did not have to look behind us to know she was there, because the girl started sobbing again, but louder this time. We tried to go as fast as we could and finally we got to the parking lot, but Phil's father was not there yet. We were not going to stay there and wait, so we kept on walking until Phil's father met us by the road and picked us up. He drove us back to their house and my mother came as soon after Phil's dad called her and Ned's mother had to come tell her to pick us up. I did not speak for a couple of days after this event. My parents were worried, but they did not press me to talk. I eventually told them that we had encountered a scary moose that had come into our camp and they believed me. They don't believe in strange things like ghosts or spirits, but my grandmother does, and so I went to her and explained what we had encountered in the forest that night. She thought it was a myling. It is the spirit of a child that died and was buried without being baptized. Usually, the mother of the child had given birth out of wedlock or in secret and killed the child soon after. There are apparently a lot of old folk tales about mylings and encounters with them, but usually in old houses where the mothers had buried them under the floorboards. I have not been back to that forest and I'm not planning to. Not camping, not hiking, not anything. I took a gap semester a couple of years ago and decided that I should take a road trip with a buddy who was also taking a semester off from school. We are from the Midwest and planned our trip to take a big circle from Ohio to LA, up to Portland and back home. We are outdoorsy guys, so we knew we were going to try to hit some wilderness along the way. So we are about a month into the trip and leaving Portland. We were taking a break from camping every night while out on the road. Itching to get back on the road and into the wilderness, my buddy finds a hike that looks interesting. It has an abandoned railroad on it, about 2 hours east of Portland. We had found the GPS coordinates on some site, maybe it was Reddit, and it said that there was an abandoned railroad with a couple of tunnels and a massive trestle that spanned a huge gorge. Sounds cool. I'm in. So we drive my Volvo station wagon towards this coordinate. If you've never been to Oregon, it's beautiful. Foggy, never-ending views of thick pine forests. The type of place that you can barely see 20 feet in any direction because of how dense the trees are. For the last hour of this 2-hour drive, we are driving on dirt logging roads. We hadn't passed a single car or seen any sign of life since getting off this rural highway. It was creepy, endless, dark forest for hours. Stop. I hit the brakes. My buddy is squinting at his phone. Looks like we are at the coordinates. I pulled to the side of the one-lane road and put the Volvo in park. Dense trees are still all around us, but I can see up ahead that there is a linear gap in the canopy. I guess that's the railroad. We hop out of the car and I load up my day pack with my camera, headlamp, water, and pepper spray and knife. After a second thought, I put the knife in my pocket. This railroad has been abandoned for about 50 years. This means that while you can still see the tracks while standing on them, the thick brush has filled the entire swath that was typically cleared on either side of the tracks. It has nearly been filled in the space between the rails, except for a foot-wide path that has been maintained by deer, elk, bear, and maybe some humans. I notice my buddy is also looking at a private property sign that is fading into a tree nearby. He looks at me, and I shrug, and we start walking. The tracks are dead straight. This means that we can see a couple of 100 yards down the center of this green tunnel of vegetation, as if I'm in a very narrow alleyway that never ends. To either side, I can hardly see 10 feet. We walk and we walk. Honestly, a boring hike considering there was no view and it was dead straight. We knew that the tunnel was up ahead, so we kept going. I kept myself busy by trying to pace my stride with the railroad ties. Step after step, we walk about 3 miles away from the car, into the woods. Suddenly I stop and my buddy bumps into my backpack. I had just looked up from my feet and was staring into a looming tunnel in front of us. Covered in moss, the entrance surrounded a black hole that went right into the mountainside. Again, we shrugged and turned off our headlamps before walking in. Graffiti covered what wasn't covered with moss, and moss was starting to cover areas that were covered by graffiti. Our headlamps dimly lit walls covered with fairly creepy graffiti. I stared eye to eye with a 20-foot tall mummy head that was made with white paint. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face because it was so dark and we couldn't yet see the end of the tunnel. Drips of water echoed off the halls, and my buddy and I quickly walked down the tracks in silence. I had my knife out at my side. I was relieved to get out, and the exit of the tunnel was a warming welcome when all the light was shining at me. I could already see a massive gorge up ahead. The tracks went across a wooden bridge that screamed Pacific Northwest. It was easy to forget about the creepiness of the tunnel, and I looked forward to busting out my camera. Once I set foot on the bridge, I realized the danger of crossing something that hasn't been maintained in 50 or so years. The wood was clearly aged, and in some places it was completely rotten. That said, the view was incredible. We balanced on the steel tracks and walked to the center of the trestle, where we could see the river about 500 feet below. Horrible logging scarred the mountainside along the gorge. I noticed places where the boards had broken through, and I hoped nobody had fallen. Instead of turning back, after getting some good shots, we kept going. The sun was getting into a late afternoon angle and was blocked by the steep mountains around us. We quickly walked off the bridge and back onto our green tunnel. For some reason, I started having second thoughts. I don't know why, but now I slowed my pace and started thinking about how I would ask my buddy to turn around. Before I was going to turn around and ask Nate, I glanced up at the tracks ahead and directly into someone's eyes about 200 yards ahead. I stopped in my tracks and could feel a cold rush to my hands and head. The person staring at me stopped too. I see another man's head poke around his. "There's 2 of them," I whispered back to Nate. Slowly, we start walking down the green tunnel towards the men, away from our car, miles behind us. They're walking towards us, towards our car, miles behind us. As we get closer, I walk faster out of fear. Bouncing on the man's chest is a large bush knife. He's wearing filthy clothes, has long matted hair, and has not broken eye contact. A revolver is tucked into his pants and he is carrying a rifle with a magazine. At this point, it's too late to turn back and I realize that my buddy and I are going to have to squeeze by these 2 men on the narrow gap between the tracks. The brush is pulling at my sleeves on either side of the tracks. "How's it going?" I asked nervously as I squeezed by the men while avoiding eye contact. I count 4 guns in the stench of BO. I am unsettled by these guys, and I got the feeling that I have never felt around someone else before. They say nothing and pass past us. I kept hurrying away. Before I knew it, they were out of sight and I looked behind me and past Nate. I turned to Nate and gave him my "what the hell" face. After walking silently for 10 minutes, we stop. I don't know what to say. I don't want to walk deeper in, but I also don't want to walk back towards the creepy dudes. Suddenly, loud moaning and shrieking starts coming from the dense woods off the tracks. It sounds like it's 100 yards away. It doesn't sound completely human, but it sounds like it's in agony, and that was the final straw. We bolt back towards the cars. I'm not a runner, but we ran over the bridge through the black tunnel and through the endless green that surrounds us. Finally, I see the logging road up ahead where our car is parked. I stop running when I hear a truck idling, and I can start to see it through the brush. A big old F-350 pickup truck idling right behind my car. My station wagon looks comically small in comparison. I can see the two men sitting in the truck and their doors and opens and guns out, staring directly at us, waiting. Nate and I shrug to each other, but this time with fear in our eyes. "Just get in the car," I stammer to Nate. We hop in and I stare at the men in our rearview mirror. We wait. My heart is pounding. Are they gonna kill us? I think to myself. My knife and pepper spray are useless. After waiting for what felt like an hour, the men haven't taken their eyes off of us. We can't back up, given how close they are behind us. I notice a fairly solid looking shoulder to the road to my right and decide I should try to pull a quick U-turn and get away. So that's what I did. I turned the wheel all the way and floored it. Thankfully, my car made the turn and was able to clear the back of their truck. We drove as fast as we could down the logging road in silence. No truck behind us. Our dust plume rose up and hit the seam we had just been in. I drove all the way to Idaho that night and had my eye on the rearview mirror the entire time. This is something that happened to me and a friend as kids and is more of a disturbing discovery than a disturbing person. We were probably somewhere between 11 and 14 at the time, and it was the middle of the summer. It was also something I didn't really come to understand until much later in life when there was no way to resolve what he and I had seen. My house was in a valley. There were a few houses along the street with it, but the hills on either side were pretty much all undeveloped forest back then. My friend and I would hike up the hill beside my house, through a few miles of woods and out on the other side where there was a neighborhood that had a farm stand style shop with local honey and a bunch of cheap candy. We also just liked to hang out in the woods a lot and would tell each other scary stories as we headed back home. None of them were all that scary looking back on the ones I can remember, but younger me was always a little spooked on the way back to my house. One dusk, while we were heading back for the day, I spotted a bit of white in a mound of moss. As a kid, I was always looking for interesting stuff to take home and collect, so I was immediately ready to go dig it out of the moss. When I did, I found it was a pelvis bone. It had probably been out there for a long time. I remember it was pockmarked and dirty, worn away slightly from time. I was pretty scared for a second, but I remembered that all sorts of animals have pelvis bones, and that this one must be from a deer or something. In my childish mind, I needed to be a know-it-all, and jumping at the first non-frightening possibility, I told my friend it was a deer pelvis. We marveled at it for a bit, but put it back because we knew my dad would be mad if we brought it back home. I forgot about it for a long time, and many years went by, but eventually I learned more about the shape of human bones as opposed to animals. I remember the shape I found quite clearly. It was almost certainly a human bone, and the size wouldn't have been an adult. It would have been closer to probably a teen's. I wonder what else was in that mound, who it could have been, and if my finding it could have given someone, somewhere, some closure. I went back and looked for it twice, thinking I might remember the part of woods it had been in, but I've never found it again. This happened 10 plus years ago, so I'm paraphrasing for all parties. Not the creepiest story, but unsettling to say the least. My dad and I were hiking on this mountain trail that was super steep and treacherous. No exaggeration, at some points I was worried I'd fall to my death over the edge if I took a wrong step. It wasn't a long hike, but super challenging. Eventually, we made it to the top. We had brought food with us and sat down and started snacking. Maybe 10 minutes later, this guy comes out of this bush, a lone bush. He literally came out of the bush. It was so obvious he was hiding there. Let me just say, and I'm not trying to sound rude, but this guy was huge, an unhealthily large man. My first thought was, how did this guy make it up here? Again, I'm not trying to be rude. I was genuinely curious as how he made it up here. I was out of breath and so was my dad, and this guy was not out of breath at all. The interaction went like this. "Hey, can I sit with you guys?" Before we could answer, he sat down on this rock next to us and started talking to us. He was asking the most cliche, creepy questions like, "Where do you guys live? How old are you? Are you married?" I was 14 at the time, and he kept saying, "You are so pretty." My dad immediately stands up, gives me a head nod like get behind me or move away from him, and tells this guy he just wants to spend time with his daughter. My dad was super polite, but I could tell he was thrown off by this guy. We start moving our area, and the guy says, "Hey, F you." Pretty aggressively too. My dad says something along the lines of, "Watch your mouth, man, my kid is here." We did have a rifle on us, and that didn't seem to register to the guy. He definitely saw it though. It was on my dad's back. The guy just sat there on the rock. He would not go away. He was staring us down. In his defense, there wasn't really anywhere for him to go except back into the bush or down the mountain. He kept staring. He gave me the most uneasy feeling. This situation was a classic scary movie thing, but my first thought was he was mentally disabled in some way, or mentally disturbed, and was probably harmless. But after we moved, he started threatening us with stuff like, "I'll kick your ass. You can't talk to me like that." Like what? We were pretty nice in asking you to leave us alone. That's when alarms started to really go off. The situation started to escalate pretty quickly after the threats. So my dad takes the rifle off his back and whispers to me to stand up and start walking down the mountain. He'll be right behind me. This next part is all from hearing movement and footsteps because I was following my dad's orders and walking down the mountain. But I could hear the guy starting after my dad, asking why we're leaving. My dad turns around and screams at him to back the F off. I could hear the click from the safety and thought this was seriously flipping happening right now. He wasn't trying to be a badass. The gun was for bears. The mountain was known for bears and we had food on us. After that, the guy finally backed off. My dad caught up to me and told me everything was fine and just to keep walking. We made it back to the car, locked the doors, and drove out of there pretty fast. To this day, I don't know how we got up there. People hunt on other parts of the mountain and hike there during the appropriate seasons. You legally cannot live on that mountain. There's nowhere to put a house. How long he'd been up there and what in the world his intentions were are beyond me. I'm just glad we had the rifle. That guy was a bear. Thanks for listening to these allegedly true scary hiking stories. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like, as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss a new video. I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. If you have a story you would like to share on the channel, whether it be a creepy hiking experience or something completely different, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. It's stories like yours that keep this channel going, and I would love to share your story with everyone in the swamp. If you haven't already, join me across the web to keep up to date with all things scary. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find all those links in the description down below. Thanks for all the support you guys always give me, and I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.